Sunlight at last.
I think I'm being stalked. Little black panther. The trouble is she keeps getting distracted by other things. That's not how to stalk Maya. Why is that Maya? Oh, distracted again. Maya, you've got to concentrate. No, distracted again. Oh, that smells nice. Come on. Yeah, you got it. Oh, bored now.
Hi everyone, Brian here, coming to you today somewhat shrouded in darkness because I've got the curtain partly closed. It's a really lovely day here today, or has been, and the sun is setting just outside my window, and if I had the curtains open I would be blinded and also would probably disappear in a blinding haze of light, a bit like my hand here. So I thought I would just keep the curtain closed for a bit so that you can see me and I can see the cards and we can have a conversation. Hope you're all well, by the way. I'm very well. I've had a good day. What did I do today? I got up very early and did some housework. I live a very exciting life, but that was quite satisfying, and also it got to the point where I was just so embarrassed about the state of the house and the mess around me that I had to do something about it. So I got up and I did something about it. I also spent some time in the garden playing with Maya, and that was delightful, and so I might share some footage of that actually with you because I took some video, so that might be the beginning or end of this video, or both. You'll probably know by now. So that was really nice. So I've set aside the rest of the day, what's left of it, to do some videos, and that includes responding to a couple of tags, because I'm really enjoying actually engaging in the conversation that tags allow us to have in the tarot community. Obviously I've got my own tag going at the moment, Tarot Tools Trio, and if you haven't already responded to that and you want to, please do. And by the way, don't at all feel, some people have said to me that you know, oh, I haven't responded because I don't have enough decks, or I don't have enough books, or I don't think I know enough. Please don't let that put you off. I know that the purpose of the tag is to talk about 3 essential decks, 3 essential books, and 3 essential spreads, but if you only have one of each, then talk about them. You know, if you don't have any, then talk about the things that you would like to have. That would be absolutely fine. This tag is not off limits to anyone, and I've watched every video that's been done so far. At least I think I have. If I've missed yours, then let me know, and I've enjoyed every one of them. So please, please, please don't be put off by thinking that you need to be some kind of amazing tarot expert to participate. You don't. Just, if you feel drawn to do it, and it will be very, very much appreciated. So that's my tag, but I'm also enjoying responding to other people's tags, and I did a response yesterday to a tag that was set up by a long time ago by Tom Benjamin, and also another tag that was set up by Chase from 2 of Owls, and I actually did a video response to both of those tags in the same video. And Simon from Two Spirit contacted me after he watched the video that I did and said, if you're doing these vintage responses to vintage tags, how would you feel about doing a response to the All About RWS, All About Rider-Waite-Smith tag, which he set up with Ragged Poet probably almost a year ago. I think it was in April last year that that started. And I said, you're on, let's do it, because I love the Rider-Waite-Smith system, I love the deck, and I haven't really spoken particularly about that deck on my channel yet. So yes, let's do that. So that's what we're going to do, and we're going to crack on with the questions. It's 10 questions and then a card draw at the end, so we'll see where that takes us. So what's your favourite RWS clone and why? And if you don't have one, you can use a deck that follows the RWS system. So maybe to start with, it would be worth clarifying what I think is meant by clone and so on, because I know that different people use that term differently, slightly differently. So some people would talk about any deck that is basically the Rider-Waite system, even if the artwork isn't strictly the same as Pixie's original artwork, they would call that a Rider-Waite-Smith clone. I tend to take the view that, you know, you've got the original Rider-Waite, or as close to the original as you can get. So my recently acquired 1971 edition of the Rider-Waite tarot, I'll consider this the kind of the tarot, and I know that obviously there were editions before this, but basically this is the tarot we're speaking about. And then clones of that I would think of as being attempts to recreate that or reprint that deck as close as possible to the original. So I'm thinking there about things like the Centennial Tarot, which obviously is Pixie's artwork again, but with slightly different, you know, coloration, more sepia toned, but very much trying to look like an authentic original deck. Then we also have variation clones, I would call them clones, like the tarot of A.E. Waite, which comes from AGM Urania, and again uses Pixie's artwork, uses you know, basically the same artwork with slight variations, so maybe the slight difference in lettering and so on. So those are definite clones in my mind. And then you get variants on the Rider-Waite deck, which are still the Rider-Waite deck, but you might, for example, find that the artwork has been somewhat redrawn. So for example, we have the Universal Waite, where the artwork is still ostensibly by Pamela Coleman Smith, the drawings are still by Pamela Coleman Smith, but they've been recoloured by Mary Hanson Roberts, and actually they look quite different. You know, they well, not quite different, but the features are different. If you look at some of the faces in here, in some of the cards, they are recognisably the same card, but the expression on the face is maybe slightly different. And although this deck is, they say it's just recoloured and it's the same drawings basically. You know, let's look at this one. It's the Queen of Wands. You know, I think that there are, to my eye anyway, enough variations for me to think of this not so much a clone of the Rider deck, but more of a kind of a variant of the Rider-Waite deck. And there we have that would be like the best angle to show it to you at. The Chariot. So slightly different, I think, in the way that some of the cards look, but still obviously the same deck. And then even more different, you have the Radiant Rider-Waite. Again, it's still the Rider-Waite deck, still recognisably that deck. Everyone's in the same place that they always are at, but you know, again, some of the this isn't just a recoloration. This, you know, looks like a complete redrawing of the deck. So it's not exactly the same artwork, but it's the same images. It's clear, it's unmistakably the Rider-Waite full, but just also different. And then you get those variants which are somewhere in between a clone and a variant, and I'm thinking here about decks like the Albano Waite, where it's Pixie's artwork but the colouring has been changed by Frankie Albano. I'm going to turn that light away because otherwise we're not going to see. I'll be able to open the curtains in a minute, so then we'll see even better. And also the Pamela Coleman Smith RWS Tarot from Los Scarabeo, which again clearly is Pixie's artwork, but you know, because of the colouring and because of the changes that have been made in terms of you know, some of the scale, there are some noticeable differences. Again, to my eye, usually in terms of facial expression. It's just that some of the lines don't look quite the same. So speaking broadly, I'm going to take clone to mean anything that looks like it definitely is the Rider-Waite deck, even if there have been kind of changes and variations in the way that the artwork is represented beyond what Pixie originally intended. So those are clones, but then also there are, and variants, but then there are also what I would call decks that are inspired by Rider-Waite, and I'm talking here about decks like the Morgan Greer Tarot. And I've got the Morgan Greer, sorry, yes, the Morgan Greer Tarot, and I've got the Morgan Greer Tarot in a tin. And again, you know, it's clearly inspired by the artwork of Pixie, but it's not the same. It's not a direct copy of that artwork. You know, the settings are slightly different. The characters you know, look different. It's clearly drawn by a different artist. Apart from anything else, these cards are much more close up when, you know, where people are involved, and where the courts are involved. So that's an example of what I would call an inspired by deck. And other decks like this include the Hanson Roberts, the Spiral Tarot, the Gilded Tarot, Sacred Rose Tarot, and yes, so that's an example of that. But back to the question. I've managed to digress for about 10 minutes on what's a clone and what's not a clone, and that's just my conceptualization of it. I realise that others will have a different take. But so in terms of my favourite clone, it would have to be, which is not the original deck but is, you know, pretty damn close to the original deck, then without a doubt, of those that I own, it would absolutely have to be, if I can get it out of its gorgeous blue, powder blue pouch, it would be the Centennial Tarot, because that to me is just so close to the original deck, obviously with a slight variation in the tone of the deck, but it is unmistakably Pixie's deck, and I really like this one. I don't like it as much as the original, my blue box original of all my Rider-Waite decks. That ironically is the last most recent Rider-Waite deck that I've acquired, and it's the first one I've had of the basic Rider-Waite deck. Every other copy I've had has been a clone or a variant. It hasn't been the deck. So that's kind of interesting. I hadn't really noticed that myself until I did this tag. But yes, in terms of the Rider-Waite clones, it's the Centennial. And in terms of my favourite inspired by Rider-Waite deck, then it's undoubtedly one that I've talked about on this channel before now many times, so many times in fact you're probably bored of me speaking about it, and that is my beloved Tarot of the Old Path, which is based on the Rider-Waite system. And you'll see that there are some cards that look recognisably influenced directly by Rider-Waite, but some that are actually differences. So the Two of Swords there, for example, that doesn't look like the Rider-Waite Two of Swords. Justice doesn't really look like Rider-Waite Justice, but nonetheless, the system that is being used here is the Rider-Waite. You know, again, the Seven of Swords does look. It's the same kind of theme and idea as the Rider-Waite deck. So this is a deck that really just, to me, is lovely, and also I have a particular affinity for it because it's my first deck. There's a Fool, so again, you know, a slightly different take on the Fool. Yes, so I won't say any more about that because I have already gone through this deck or talked about this deck on this channel. So that is my answer to question number 1. Don't worry, the answers to the next questions will not take as long as that, probably. So, what's your life path card and how do you relate to it? And by your life path card, what you do is you take your full date of birth, you add your full date of birth together until you get a number of 21 or lower. So if it's 23, for example, that will be 5, the Hierophant. Well, the way that I've learned to do this is, and I've talked a bit about this before in a previous video. Oh, blinded by the light. Oh, gorgeous. Sunlight. I'm just absorbing as much sun as I can when I get a chance. Not that I'm a sun worshipper, actually, I'm not. But it just has felt like a very long winter this year. And I love the winter, I love the dark part of the year, but even I am beginning to crave a bit more light. So anyway, where was I? I've managed to digress again. So yes, the way that I learned this, I used what I think is Mary Greer's system as she outlines it in her book, Who Are You in the Tarot, which used to be called Tarot Constellations. And what you do is you add your birth date number together until you get to a number between 0 and 22, and then you add the digits together again. So your first number you get between 0 and 22 is your personality card. That's a kind of outward face, if you like, that you present to the world. And then the second number is your soul card, and that's a bit more about your inner self, and they can be the same. So if I do that, I add my birth date together, and for my personality number I get 16, which of course is the Tower. And here's the Tower from the Low Scarabeo Pamela Coleman, Smith deck. And the then if I add those numbers together, the 6 and the 1, I get 7. So my soul card is the Chariot, and here it is again from the Low Scarabeo Pamela Coleman Smith deck. And incidentally, here is the Tower from Tower of the Old Path. I love that card. Very unusual, but actually this speaks to me in the sense that I think of the Tower as being, you know, people think of it sometimes as a card of destruction, and I think of it as the card of destructuring. So I think of it as a sudden destructuring, but very much a card that sends a message of the need to kind of take oneself apart and look at things from a different perspective, the ego falling away. And so this card, I think, represents that very well because of the picture of the figure, which looks a bit like a king of some sort, being the edifice being torn down. Anyway, those are my personality and soul cards. But I actually have thought of a different way of doing this, or an additional way of doing this, because, and I've spoken about this in a previous video, it occurred to me, why do we only, when we're doing this, use our birth date? Why don't we also use our birth time? Because of course, if you're getting a birth chart drawn up for an astrological reading, it's going to be far more accurate, and astrologers will say to you, if you've got the time of your birth, then that's what we need. If we don't have that, then it's not going to be nearly as accurate. So excuse me, I'm just pulling wires out with my feet here. So it occurred to me, why not add in my birth time? Now I happen to know my birth time, so what I've done is the same process of adding the numbers together, but instead of just adding the year and the day and the date, the year, the day and the month together, I've added in the hour and the minute. So and then I keep going until I get to a number between 0 and 21, and or 0 and 22, and I get 9. So in this case, it's the Hermit. And there's the Hermit from the Albano Waite Tarot. You know, the thing that's interesting there for me is that all of that resonates with me. So if I think about my personality being about destructuring, and my soul being about the Chariot, and the kind of the adding in the birth time maybe being about getting a little bit closer to home, being the Hermit, then that makes sense to me, because I can see that as almost like the layers of an onion, and if you peel those layers, then there's relevance in all of that. So I can think of a time in my life where, for example, it was significantly destructured by events, and so the 16 makes sense to me. The Chariot I can think of being very much about progress and activity and taking control of things, and instigating emotion and being an agent of change, and I can think of that being very true from my career point of view. So the work that I do is very much in line with that, the kind of job that I have and the role that I have in my organisation. I'm a chief executive, so I've got that kind of senior responsibility, which I'm not particularly looked for. It's just something that I've sort of grown into. So that makes sense to me. And from the Hermit point of view, if that's a kind of an expression of something even deeper, then that also definitely speaks to me, because I think of all of those cards, I probably see myself more as being like the Hermit than anything else. Not because I'm terribly solitary or so on, but although I do, you know, I like my own company, I can have long periods of time on my own quite happily, but because I think of the Hermit as being someone who is shining a light and sharing a lesson, not because he thinks he knows it all, but simply because he has got something to share. And that's kind of what how I see part of my work. Certainly the part of my work that is based around coaching and writing, I see that being very much about what that is. So that makes sense to me. Before we go to the next question, I do want to just share with you one other thing that you might want to do, and that is another numerological thing you can do in tarot to find something out, and this could be considered your potential number. And the way you do this is to take your birth name, your full birth name, and you add it up numerologically. And there's a particular way of doing this. There's different ways of doing this. I'll see if I can find a chart to link to in the description below so you could do it. But basically, you write the numbers, I think you write the numbers 1 to 9 in a line, and then you start writing the letters of the alphabet under them until you get to 9, then go down to the bottom. So you'd write A under 1, B under 2, C under 3, etc. until you get to I under 9, and then you put J under 1 because you're on to the next row, then K, L, M, N, O, and that takes you to R, and then S under 1, T, U, V, etc, etc. So I'll try and link to something that explains that better than I've just explained it. And that gives you a numerical value for each letter, and you can use that to work out what the numerical numbers for your name is. And again, you can do it on the same basis. You go until you get to a number between 0 and 21, or 22, and you count 22 as the full. So if I do that, I get 13, the close. So I think that as being very much about transformation and change, and again, this kind of change agent idea holds true there. And actually, if I reduce that down, I get the Emperor, and that holds true again in terms of responsibility. So for me, this adds quite a lot of richness to the concept of looking at your tarot cards, numerological tarot cards, using numerology, life path cards. So that was just a little digression. Question 3. We'll move faster now. What's your favourite major and your favourite minor? Well, my favourite majors are actually some of the cards I've just spoken about. So I would say the Chariot and the Hermit are two that actually I've always really liked, and I liked them before I knew they were life path cards. Favourite minor, I would say, is the Eight of Wands. I just love this because in my head, what's happening here is those wands are flying up into the sky, and that's partly because, if I can find it, in some decks it's not clear whether the cards are flying up into the sky or flying down to the ground, and in fact in some decks 8 of rods or sword, 8 of, did I say swords? I meant wands. 8 of wands is means fall. In the Barbara Walker tarot, for example, that's the key word on 8 of rods, it's fall. But to my mind, that's the opposite of what I think of it as meaning, and that's partly because on the deck that I learned in, Tarot of the Old Path, those broomsticks, which are rods in this deck, are, I think, clearly flying into the sky. So I think of that very much as being what that card's about. So that's a favourite minor. Do you prefer the Rider-Waite system over others, and if so, why? And if not, why not? I don't prefer it over others. I love it very much because it's the one that I learned on, and the sun is going down and there's a lovely sunset. I'll see if I can get some of the sunset on film if I can. Also try not to look into it, that would be sensible. I love the Rider-Waite-Smith system, but I like to keep my options open, and I like learning other systems, and also I like when I come to a tarot reading, I think of myself, whenever I'm doing a tarot reading, I'm respectful of the deck that I'm using. So if there's a particular system associated with a particular deck, then I will be respectful to that and will give that priority, if you like. But I also very much feel that I have got in my head, and many of us do, well, all of us who read tarot do, a virtual deck of tarot cards in my head, which is comprised of the meanings of all of the cards that I have learned about over the years from all of the different systems, and all of my own impressions about tarot. And that isn't, you know, I can't just turn that off, that's there. So that's informed by other systems as well as Rider-Waite. So I love Rider-Waite, but I don't prefer it over others. What card is stalking you currently? This is the chap who's stalking me currently, the King of Wands. So again, wands and authority, responsibility, kind of makes sense to me, partly because my responsibilities in my day job feel quite not heavy at the moment, but they do feel quite acute in the sense that there's, I've got some significant things that I've got to achieve on behalf of the organisation that I lead. I'm also taking on more leadership roles. I've recently joined the boards of a couple of major organisations, and I'm working to give the best I can to them. And also this year, or this end of last year, I made the decision, and that's partly what this YouTube channel is about, to do more about turning my passion for tarot and other metaphysical, psycho-spiritual systems into something that's a bit more firmly at the centre of my life and career. And I think there's something aspirational in that for me. The King of Wands, the King of Passion, King of Fire, King of Life Purpose. Yeah, so he is stalking me, and I'm fine with that. So, cards you look for first in any style of deck, the make or break cards. Well, the Chariot, because it's one of my life cards, and the others I spoke about I tend to look at. In terms of minors, I tend to look at the Two of Cups, the Five of Pentacles, and the Six of Swords. I often look at the Death card, because I think the Death card in some decks can be really fascinating and very moving. So I look at the Death card. I tend to also look at the first two of the majors, the Magician, the first, apart from the Fool. I'll look at the Fool. I almost forgot the Fool. The Fool goes without saying, so I look at the Fool. But I also look at the Magician and the High Priestess. And I look at the Empress. Probably the ones that I really, really look at. The two that I really look at are the Chariot, because it's my life card, and the Empress, because the Empress card is a very special card to me for reasons I've explained previously. And I'll link my Empress Dream video below if you haven't seen that. So yeah, those are the cards that I look at in a deck. Not just Waite-Smith, but any deck. First and last Waite-Smith. So my first Waite-Smith clone stroke variant was the Universal Waite. I got this before I had any other type of Waite, and of course my first Waite system deck was Tarot of the Old Path. So my last one, as I said, my last Waite-Smith deck was ironically the Rider-Waite Tarot, the Rider-Waite-Smith Tarot in this blue box edition. So that's the most recent one that I have acquired, and probably the most recent one that is inspired by, or at least partly inspired by, Rider-Waite is the Anna Kay Tarot. And there are enough for me, there are enough Rider-Waite allusions in this for me to feel that this is an inspired by Rider-Waite deck. Not necessarily exactly the same, but some of the symbolism, the idea behind the images to me is, pretty clearly Rider-Waite. So, yeah, that's that. How many Rider-Waite-Smith decks do you have? So I've got 7 clones and or variants, and I've got 8 decks that are inspired by Rider-Waite. So what's that? 15 in total if we're adding them all up in that way. Are you a by the book or an intuitive reader? A bit of both. So I very much learned by the book. I love books, and I love reading about tarot in books, and I love learning new systems. So I do tend to use guidebooks when I first get a deck and really go to them to check that I'm not missing something that the deck creator intended. But inevitably when I do a reading, I find that intuition comes in quite strongly. I'm not in any way psychic. I don't see myself as being in any way psychic. So for me it's interpreting what's in front of me in the cards, but very often I will get a strong sense of intuition about what a particular card is trying to draw my attention to. So how do you feel about the proliferation of Rider-Waite-Smith style decks? Is this good or bad? Are there too many of them? I'm not unhappy about that. I think it's fine, and I think it's great that there's the opportunity to pick up as many different decks as possible, because of course there's always a chance that you'll find an artist that particularly speaks to you, and who does a Rider-Waite variation that you maybe weren't aware of, and I've heard of people, for example, who say, oh, I didn't really like Waite-Smith until I saw such and such a deck, either a clone or a variant or an inspired by deck, and that really turned them on to Waite-Smith. So no, I don't think of it as being too many. But for myself, I actually am not particularly interested in acquiring just lots and lots of variations of Waite-Smith. I'm more interested in going deeper with Waite-Smith in terms of the learning, and also branching out into other systems and going deeply into those as well. So now, draw a card from your favourite deck and ask, what do I need to learn right now? So I'm going to, if I can find where to put it, I'm going to use Tarot of the Old Path because it's the tried and true and trusted. Let me just make sure I haven't got anything like the advertising cards in there, and also let me regather a couple that I had out to show you. Make sure I don't get any of the wrong deck in here. So, Tarot of the Old Path. Oops, I'm not going to count that as a jumper. I tend not to count jumpers. I'm going to take my ring off actually because it's easier to shuffle. I tend not to count jumpers. You know when you shuffle cards and a card pops out and lands on your lap? Occasionally I will, if it feels like it really jumped out and in a bit of an unusual way, then I'll probably go okay and I'll pay attention. But if I'm a bit clumsy. I'm not the world's best shuffler, I have to say. You know, so if it just kind of pops out because I've carelessly shuffled, then I just say, get back in there, and I get on with the reading. So, so yes, what are we reading for? So, how do you feel? Oh, and there is a stray card in here. Look, we have got, in this pile of cards that I was shuffling, Tarot of the Old Path was a universal weight card, and it's a Six of Swords, which actually, if I hadn't picked the Eight of Wands for my favourite minor, I probably would have picked this. And this speaks to me because this for me is about safe passage after a period of difficulty. And I think actually that is a bit where I'm at the moment. There have been some difficulties in various areas of life lately, in the recent past, and some of them are still there, but I think that I am coming through them to a calmer, safer harbour, if you like. So that says something. So I've treated that as though it was a jumper, but it wasn't really. It was just the wrong bloody card and the wrong bloody deck. So we'll keep going. So what is the old path telling me I need to learn right now? So we'll just cut, and we have got the Page of Rods. Well, that's interesting because I spoke about the King of Rods stalking me and maybe being aspirational, and that maybe being where I'm trying to get to in terms of some of the decisions that I've made. Well, the Page of Rods, I think that's telling me to allow myself to be at an earlier stage of the process. I'm not at the king stage yet, so it's fine to be at the page stage. And also the page, pages tell me a little bit about risk. They can sometimes warn of danger, so they can alert one to not taking silly risks, but they can also sometimes mean it's worth taking a risk and it's worth branching out, and that's certainly how I feel at the moment. So yeah, I think that's a rather lovely card to get in that draw. So this has been fun. I've really enjoyed doing this. So thank you very much, Simon, for challenging me to respond to your challenge of last year, and I hope I've done it justice. And I'll put Simon's original video below along with the instructions for the tag, and even though this tag is not necessarily currently active, if you haven't yet done it, I would love to hear what you have to say, and I'm sure Simon would too. So thank you all very much, and I'll see you again in my next video, which I'm probably going to film as soon as I stop the camera on this one. So see you very soon. Bye.
I like it. Where's it gone? Where's it gone, man? Where's it gone?